Welcome to episode 403 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and he's Kevin Williams. And Kevin Williams, you're going to have to be carrying some of the heavy lifting today because, as you can hear, I'm back from my travels. Thanks, everybody, for all the kind words about some rest and relaxation. I did some of that on my little European vacation, but my nephew's also got me sick. So here we are back in the home studio, but now dealing with a little bit of a cold. But fortunately for me, it's just a little bit of cold. And unlike Sergi Roberto, who's, I guess we start with some bad news here. Dislocated shoulder for him as the one of the four captains that you could argue was playing best this season. Sergi Roberto, surprise, surprise, was the captain that was actually showing out. And he will likely be out minimum 2 weeks. That is a dislocated shoulder. I mean, that's when it stops like being a little bit owie for any activity. And then we'll see. Yeah. I mean, it could be up to 6 to 12 weeks. I mean, dislocated shoulders are... it's very individual. Again, I'm no doctor, but it's very individual, and it depends on recovery, but also how much you use it. And certainly you have to use it, not to say quite a bit. It's not like he's a baseball pitcher, but you do use it quite a bit in a game where you have to go toe-to-toe with somebody, mano-a-mano, especially as a fullback when you're constantly going hip-to-hip with somebody.
Well, and the worst thing is that whenever he gets in form, he seems to get injured. He is pretty uncanny that way, and I will be one of the first ones to tell you that, I think he is past it. He's not in the liability phase of his game with 98% of the team Barcelona faces, but with that upper 2%, meaning Champions League, he's not the fullback you want out there. But Liga matches, he's fine. He should be fine for most of Europa League, which is more and more likely unless Victoria Pilsen can pull off a minor miracle. But I mean, it's a bummer for him because, I mean, he really was undergoing his sort of geriatric renaissance and worked really well with Dembele yesterday, who, when you give him someone to run alongside him and play off of, you see the results. He sort of had a reasonably decent match yesterday, right?
Well, it's interesting because usually I've been very critical of his and Dembele's partnership. I think it has largely been, I don't want to say trash, that's a bit too much, but in the preseason in particular, I thought Dembele was good in the preseason, but the only times he struggles when it was him and Roberto. But as you said, Roberto, for about the last month, was in the best form he has been in, well, since he's basically been out for the last 2 years. You could say, I mean, 2019 is the first year we're talking about now when he was, and you said geriatric, but in 2019, when he was last in form, he was 27 at that time, right? He's 30 now, which he should, geriatric should not be the word for 30-year-old, but again, here we are with Sergi Roberto. But yeah, I think yesterday, I mean, we're going to start with Dembele because he's the whole reason we're kind of even recording on the Monday instead of the Tuesday, to be honest with you. If Barcelona had not gone out, if they had gotten punched in the mouth a little bit by Athletic Club, as some might have expected them to, then we would probably be talking tomorrow. But we're talking today because it's all about Ousmane Dembele. And the difference with Sergi Roberto prior to yesterday and yesterday was he was much more dynamic, overlapping runs around Dembele. Yes, he was still making the runs inside. That's how he scored the second goal. But I thought Sergi Roberto's movement and space, I mean, creating space for Dembele is the whole name of the game. We've seen against Inter Milan with the 5 at the back. We've seen when Barcelona do have those problems in the Champions League that there's constant double teams coming his way. And his decision-making, coupled with 2 to 3 defenders marking him, does lead to some criticism for Dembele. But we saw when it was Gabi who went from the left interior. Well, I mean, he was on the right interior, and then he moved back to the left for the Champions League and for matches to try to get something better out of him there. But now he's moved back to the right, and he was actually making some runs in behind the back line. He was actually making runs into opportunistic positions for Dembele to kind of run underneath as well. And if you're going to get movement in behind from Gabi, if you're going to get movement overlapping from Sergi Roberto, that tells me that there is finally space for Ousmane Dembele. And Kevin, I pretty much set you the runway. I'm tired of planes, but I've got it on my mind. But I pretty much set you the runway, and it's time for you to go to 10,000 feet on Dembele, I think.
Well, I mean, I think, look, I mean, Xavi finally watched his Dortmund tapes and said, hey, he needs somebody to run alongside him. Maybe that'll help. I mean, when you use the normal Barcelona setup and you stick him on the wing, give him the ball, and say, here you go, make some magic, he's not going to be able to. I mean, he's not that kind of player. He's never been that kind of player. When you give him the ball at his feet with a runner and some space to move into, now he's not, contrary to what people think, going to give you a goal and 3 assists every match. I mean, it's absurd to have the people saying, well, if he played like that regularly, I would trust him more. But if he played like that, he'd be messy. And he would have left the club in the summer window, right? I mean, he is a player who, let's not forget, spent most of his Barcelona years injured. And now that he's been fit for as long as he ever has been at the club, I mean, and Xavi's confidence in him, he's seeing results. I mean, last night was extraordinary because Athletic Club didn't have the fleetest of foot fullbacks, shall we say, which let he and Balde have a field day. But I mean, you also saw the result of, let's not forget that when De Jong drove the ball, right? I mean, versus Grandpa Busquets, that also changed the shape of the Athletic Club defense and gave them Dembele as well as Sergi Roberto more running space. I mean, when you have Busquets sitting there contemplating, trying to dish out through balls versus having someone drive the ball through the midfield at the defense, it makes a huge difference. It not only creates imbalances, but it makes a defense move. And I mean, both matches against Inter, Xavi went with the traditional, right? I mean, and I think the results will be Barcelona playing in the Europa League. But I mean, the quote from Xavi where he said, I want Dembele to do what he does. He's going to lose balls. That's fine. I don't want him to stop doing what he does. I think summed it up. I mean, Xavi has fully committed, and I think yesterday we saw why. Now, I don't know that you're always going to have that set up, but if anything that they can do to keep from isolating Dembele on the flanks, right? Hey, you go beat 3 defenders. Well, he's not going to be able to. Same with Rafinha. But if you get them the ball on the move with a player or two to overlap in a midfield drive in the attack, I mean, he and Rafinha are very different players, and it was fun to watch. And I mean, obviously, it was funny. He got a perfect 10 from who scored, and I was like, huh. It would have been a 8.5 for me because I still felt like he wasn't defending like he should given his pace. But hey, who am I?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that it might be a 10 of 10 because we're setting the expectations of what he's supposed to do and what his job is. And it was interesting too because he was 0 for 3 in his crosses, which is a good sign, believe it or not, that Barcelona are going to win 4-0 because the rest of the stats were pretty good. I mean, we talked about losing the ball as well. And I've said before that the sweet spot for him is between 12 and like 18. If he's dispossessed or loses the ball between 12 and 18 times, and it's also where he loses the ball is really important too, which is what he did yesterday. Whenever he lost the ball, he lost it in the final third, but he also had
Yes.
17 final third passes completed. And that number is more important. I mean, so think about that. He may have lost the ball 16 times, most of which were in the final third of the other team, but he completed 17 final third passes, which just creates so much more havoc and is more positive than anything he does negative for you. So 3 assists, 3 shots on goal, 4 key passes or chances created, whatever you want to call them. He was 4 for 5 on his accurate long balls too. So Barcelona De Jong had 2 or 3 long balls, diagonal balls, which you don't really see from him often. And the overlapping runs from Balde on one side and now we're kind of talking about formation, right? And how what got the best out of Dembele, and is what Ernesto Valverde also admitted, what kind of caught him on the chin was that Xavi, he pulled that old, what if we have Andres Iniesta, Pedri on the left wing and have him coming inside a little bit? And that worked to great effect, not only offensively, but defensively on the press as well, because it was Robert Lewandowski defending with a little bit of David Villa shade because he would go out to the left wing when Pedri would come inside. And Barcelona had the versatility against Athletic Club, who they play a 4-4-2. They're going to play a 4-4-2. Well, it's been a little bit of a almost a 4-5-1 this year with Inaki Williams up top and then Nico Williams on the right wing. But even if it's a 4-5-1 or a 4-4-2, regardless of what Athletic Club is in, those 4 midfielders were that variation, if you will, because Pedri was able to kind of playing this free role up in a diamond where Busquets would be the pivot, and then you have Gabi and De Jong both kind of making runs in behind, but then it was Pedri who would come in the center. Then there were times where the actual formation that Xavi did give on paper to the journalists at the stadium was a 4-3-3 with Pedri playing as a left winger, and you did see that. And it was a good sign to me that Pedri was, I would argue, his least effective in weeks, but Barcelona were their most effective in weeks. And that's a good sign because it wasn't everything on Pedri. Pedri was able to just be disciplined, was able to move the ball. His diagonal balls are then really, really good. And both he and De Jong, and this is why topic number 2 here is I'm not sure if it was Dembele's best game for Barcelona. It probably was, but it was definitely 100% Alejandro Balde's best game in a Barcelona uniform right now. And
Oh, my
and
heavens.
that's the transition. The formation also got the best out of him because you have De Jong who is helping him defend because again playing basically in a double pivot at times with Pedri in front of both he and Busquets. So De Jong was right there to help him defend, and he knew he could get forward with reckless abandon. But in the same regard, for what Balde was doing, he shut Nico Williams down. If nobody's been watching, the 20-year-old Nico Williams has arguably been the most exciting 20-year-old in the Liga this season. And no disrespect to Ansu Fati, but it's been Nico Williams right now. But Balde, within the first few minutes, shut him down 1-for-1, just stood him up. 38th minute, they try to double team him. He dribbles out of trouble there or passes out of trouble using a wall pass. And then even late in the game, he picks Nico Williams' pass, just kind of tell you, hey, this is summarizing today's game. I had Nico Williams in my pocket all day, and I also got forward. My final ball, again, that's really his whole thing, right? The final ball is what it is. It's not there yet. But at 18 years old, his dribbling, his press resistance, his passing, his defending is just so much better than I thought it would be. Again, I keep repeating myself, Kevin, and you can add on to this, but he was getting absolutely manhandled. He was 17, and the difference between 17 and 18 is a lot different between. It's a lot different between, again, you and I getting a year older, but from 17 to 18, it's a huge step. But for him to take, again, last year in the third division of Spain, he was getting just bodied by grown men, by big men. Were just leaving him in the dust, and not physically. Speed wise, because he always was faster. But just physically, a little touch was going to knock him off his mark. But he has just stood strong this year. He's strong. He's I know, strong enough, I should say, strong enough and fast enough to problem solve. And if you have a left back that can problem solve, that does solve a lot of your problems.
So that's, as you know, that's the thing I've been clamoring for since Abidal left is having a fullback, preferably a left back that can problem solve. He broke up a number of plays in the box as well. He's got sideline to sideline range. He knows how to defend by moving forward into the attacker instead of running away as Jordi Alba does. And I mean, it's just watched him. I got to watch him live twice when I was in Barcelona about a year ago, just over a year ago, and he didn't look ready. Not. I mean, and so I have no idea what happened to him. Basically, in 1 year, but he's gone from being not ready to being far and away the best fullback on the team. And I mean, if you know, I appreciate how much people liked Serginho Dest, but if Dest had done what Balde has done, he'd still be at the club, right? He just wasn't good enough in any parameter, right? Where Balde is good enough in 95% of what a fullback needs, right? Even if you take into account the people who think that Barcelona fullbacks need to attack first, and then if they can defend, that's nice. Going forward, he offers more than anybody else on the side as well. It's just a remarkable thing. I don't know if it's Xavi, if it's just time. I have no idea what happened, and I wish I did, and I hope someone says one day, so Alejandro, what the heck happened between this time
Yeah.
last year and now? Because I mean, he has been transformed, and he is, I would argue, right now, I can't think of a young fullback in La Liga and maybe European football period. There aren't a lot of young fullbacks better than him. Obviously, Davies comes out, right? Those guys like that. But I mean, he's easily in the top 10 for young fullbacks in European football. And that's remarkable.
Yeah, I think. Well, for starters, I will say Jordi Alba's final ball, his final third ball, is still, I think, the best on the team. But as you have made mention, the rest of it has left Jordi Alba a little bit behind. I mean, and I think that's why we've seen. I mean, this season and his salary means that Xavi won't do it. But yeah, I mean, what you lose defensively from Jordi Alba, his positioning has been was especially in the preseason was rough. His final third ball in the preseason was rough. And then if you don't have his final third ball, then you don't really have Jordi Alba because that's the whole point of Jordi Alba. That's why his partnership with Messi worked so well all those years. And to try to answer what happened with Balde, well, when you had seen him 1 year ago, again, he was just recovering from a long-term shoulder injury, having previously had an ankle injury before that. And so last year was just a lot of start and stop for him. And that can be really difficult for a young player to kind of find their form. And my argument with Balde has always been this. What I saw from him physically, just the tools, was that once his teammates got better, that he might get better. And we do see
Yeah.
that from some Barça Athletic or Barça B players, where once the talent around them increases, Callado was actually kind of one of those arguments where I figured that Callado would step his game up as his teammates got better, which is interesting because of how good he's been for Elche this year, because his
Yeah.
teammates have actually not gotten better for him, and he has gotten quite better. And he's also much more on the ball in a way that he wouldn't be at Barcelona. So I think for Callado, you're kind of seeing some of the best of Callado at Elche because of what he's able to, or the responsibility he's being given that he would not be given at Barca. I mean, if he would be on the field at all. But aside on Callado. But for Balde too, I think some credit, we don't know the exact number, but some credit must be due to Xavi. Because again,
Yes.
this kid from the end of last season in May to now went from a player that I was like, oh, I mean, in my preseason predictions, I even said, well, if he doesn't go out on loan because he's the third left back, but I mean, the week after that, we learned that Alonso was signed because the club was really banking on pushing Alba out to Inter Milan or AC Milan, ironically enough. And so the club is really banking on only one of those two being around, and they did expect Balde to be around. So Xavi had already kind of seen in preseason something enough that he was going to be around. And I was nervous because, I mean, you know me. I mean, I'm watching Barca Athletic. I know about the U16 cadet Oz, and so I'm saying, hey, I can't count my chickens before they hatch. I just want these kids to get some minutes. And I really I was hoping he would get between 500 and 700 minutes this season. And obviously he is going to blow through that because it's October. And, I think Alba, I'm not sure what his future is going to be in January because his salary is just too high. You know what I mean? You and I have talked about this for too many players over the seasons. There's no way that if you're Jordi Alba, you are leaving the club in any capacity, right? He's a captain of the club still, and his salary is still, to say egregious would be taking away a few euros from him. And, I think that you're going to just continue to see Alonso and you're occasionally going to see Alba pop up, but Balde is the starter. And it does beg the question that, especially for yesterday, the criticism to Xavi is probably reasonable too, that if Balde starts against Inter in Italy, maybe Barcelona are in the Champions League. And I kind of said that. I softly said that where, I don't think Alonso played poorly against Inter at Inter, but he also couldn't. Well, it's systemic because you had a fullback who could not get around that right back. They were able to bring everybody in. So it was not a matter of what Alonso didn't do. It's a matter of what Alonso can't do that a Balde can do. Right. So it's not that Alonso did something wrong. It's that Balde does solve that problem in a way that Alonso didn't. And so I kind of had thrown that out there and said, I don't want to blame Alonso here. But now in hindsight, that could have been a decision that, and it's crazy to say that Xavi's big mistake this season was not starting an 18-year-old fullback. That is a hard pill to swallow if you're Xavi Hernandez.
But it's real. And the thing is on form, form also argued for Balde starting. I mean, there was nothing, that young man did nothing wrong. And, when you roll out a, for me anyway, reprehensible human as well as geezer, right, over your best fullback on form because of some, I don't know, veteran nous or what the heck ever. I mean, I feel like Xavi's selection and tactics in both those matches damaged the club as much as, well, not as much as PK did, but or Busquets, but I mean, his lineups didn't set the team up for the most success because you had Dembele over there saying, "Here's the ball, go make magic." Play is so slow when Busquets has the reins, and so really Inter could just walk from side to side.
Yeah, I mean, I argue too though that Koundé healthy, Barca get a better result in both of those matches. And yes, that's when PK obviously gets replaced. But I mean, even yesterday, Koundé is just, he puts out fires. And yes, Araujo does as well. So this is not about Araujo. Araujo's not around. So of the center backs right now, Koundé puts out fires. That's what happens.
Yes.
And so, I mean, we saw even late in the game where Ter Stegen, he got a little bored. He's like, we haven't conceded at home yet. So let's have some fun. And he goes on a walkabout. And yet his defense still with Koundé and Eric Garcia, and I think those two really complement each other really well. That being Koundé and Garcia, because they both move the ball very quickly, they move the ball well, and Koundé just makes Eric better because you know I know you've gone in on Eric many times. Like, no, he's not the starter. He's their
He can't
no, he
defend.
cannot.
He just
No, he
can't
can't. He's
defend.
their third or fourth center back. But that's what happens with Eric Garcia when you put the best ball distributor on the team next to Koundé or Araujo, you're going to get some good stuff. You're going to get an ability to control a game, and it's all been about control. And four midfielders plus Eric plus Koundé, that's why Athletic Club had no shot with even touching that ball. They didn't get a whiff of it yesterday because when you have again, you overload your midfield. And you also have the ball distribution from Eric and Koundé. The ball just moves quick enough. I mean, that's one of your big arguments too. That when Barcelona aren't playing well, they're not moving the ball fast enough. And that continues to be the argument for Eric Garcia in La Liga. And I think that's another big microcosm of this season. Because I want to talk about Lewandowski here, but kind of to take us and transition into that. Barcelona in the Liga, Eric Garcia is good enough. Sergi Roberto is good enough. We'll have to see about Bayern. Busquets is good enough. Rafinha has been good enough. But in the Champions League, the minute that competition has been raised, the minute that the players on the other team are good enough to defend and then come out on the counterattack, then you're right. Eric Garcia is Barca's third or fourth center back because Araujo, Koundé, and Christensen should all be running backwards or defending against the likes of Chalangu or whoever it may be, right? Like, it just, they should be better. And so Eric Garcia is not up to it. Roberto is not up to it. You know, the second that happens, that competition is raised, now you're looking for them. And so for me, Sergi Roberto deserves to be on this team as the backup right back because that is what he is. Bayern is also a backup right back, and Barca have two backup right backs. Eric Garcia, again, he's an overqualified fourth center back, but he is the fourth center back, and I'm totally fine with that. He's cheap. He's on 3 million euros a year, and he's got captain material, and he's 21 years old, so he could still improve defending. Probably won't, but he still might. And if he's a third or fourth center back, you're in a good spot there. And the interesting thing about Lewandowski, and I think this is the interesting thing too, that Lewandowski was supposed to be good enough everywhere, but Lewandowski has been way good enough for the Liga. That's why Barcelona are still kind of on pace, with the exception of El Clasico. And I mean, how good was that goal yesterday? I know we're not seeing the Champions League. That's not really what I'm talking about here. But gosh, how good was he yesterday?
So he had space. And he had space because of movement. Both Inter matches, right, with that lack of movement, then Inter could just park two defenders on him. In the Classique, I mean, he was mostly single teams, but Barcelona played so poorly in that match. And there again, you saw the lineup and I was like, yeah, no surprise. But I noted the other week, I think that Lewandowski's at that phase now, that veteran phase, where his knob is turned down just a notch, right? Time, minutes, right? And so at the point of the spear, again, those top 2-3% of teams that you see in Champions League, he's not quite there anymore, and that's what happens to top players. Benzema somehow has managed to defy time. Lewandowski, Villarreal, awesome. Athletic Club, awesome, right? Bayern, he's that little edge is gone, and goals that a year or two ago he knocks in, now they're going wide, they're going over. It's just a consequence of aging. And the fascinating thing now is I hope that Xavi's repeated use of Ferran Torres at the 9, which is where I think he will be eventually useful. None of this second striker nonsense. If he's not your guy in the box, get him off the field. He's a liability. So, my hope is that Xavi is planning ahead for when Lewandowski takes that next notch back, right, and becomes slightly less effective in Liga, et cetera. And I mean, he is a fantastic player. I was raving about his touch, his first touch on Twitter today. He picked one ball out of the air that was knocked him over distance from Ter Stegen. He looked like Neymar pulling that ball down. It was crazy, and you don't expect
that turn yesterday, and like immediately knowing where the
yes,
goal was, he scores that goal. I mean, so that's the argument though. This season of his, was it 14 goals? 8 of those goals he scores against everybody, and it is, as you said about space, like system wise, if there is space for him, you're right. There was the one against, what was it, Inter, or is it against Bayern, on that cross where he just goes wide on the back post. Like that's one of those that's going to haunt him for the rest of this season, and he is missing some of those. But he's also the
yeah.
one against Villarreal. He scores against anybody. The one yesterday, he scores against anybody, and I think
I don't know, because I mean, Neuer is a higher. I mean, that's what killed Pedri
Neuer's
twice.
not there on Wednesday. So good luck to Bayern Munich then.
Because I mean, the thing about Pedri, I don't know if Pedri really fully comprehended how good a keeper Neuer was. I mean, both those shots are goals against, I would say, 99.9% of keepers in the league. You've got that top, 0.1% of guys. Your Oblaks, your Casillas, your Neuer. I mean, so Pedri did everything right as far as he was concerned, but Neuer was the mutant, right? And I think, I mean, I just I love Lewandowski's. Yeah, I wish that the club didn't have to spend as much money as it did to get a 34-year-old in the last year of his contract. But you could argue that the need necessitated the outlay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Lewandowski has been fantastic this
Yeah, Barcelona would
year.
not have enough goals this season to get by without Lewandowski. They needed someone who you could
Yes.
guarantee almost 30 goals. I mean, that's what you're talking about. Where if you're, especially, it was unexpected the form that Rafinha would be in. And that's where I do want to transition a bit to the Bayern Munich thing now, because, and it's kind of where we ended, where with the way the Ferran Torres has played the last 2 games, what we still have yet to see from Ansu, and then we see in moments, but we still haven't seen, and then what we saw from Dembele yesterday. I mean, you can immediately put Dembele should be starting on the right wing against Bayern Munich. Xavi has made some mistakes with his lineups, as we've said this year, but I don't think he'd be willing to make that mistake again. So it should be Dembele on the right wing. Lewandowski's obviously going to start in the middle. Now you're speaking about the left wing, and your answer is, I mean, Ansu really is the only left winger for that team, because as we made mention, Ferran Torres should be coming into that game late to be in the middle of the field.
Yeah.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly that Ferran Torres, that run he made, where he didn't even have to look at the goal, because when he is straight on, he knows exactly where the goal is, and he can find his positions and run in behind, and it all makes a ton of sense. Ferran Torres makes all the sense in the world when he plays in that position and does what he did yesterday. I mean, even the run for that goal yesterday, how deep he was
Yeah.
dropped in. There were 4 Barcelona players in front of him that he sprinted past, knowing exactly where he needed to be. And he makes a ton of sense. So you would not want to see him on the left wing. And then Rafinha obviously can't play on the left. I mean, that is zero.
Right.
It's a zero. And so instead of putting Rafinha back on the right and then throwing Dembele on the left, you've got to have Dembele on the right. Lewandowski's got to be up top. And so that does bring up an interesting question, where can Ansu start 2 games in a row? Can Rafinha or should Rafinha be on the bench for 3 straight games? for 55 million euros or whatever he was. Like it's yes is
Yes.
the answer, but it's also this it's an uncomfortable question. But you'd also argue that once this Bayern Munich game is done, especially if what Inter and Vitoria earlier in the day, if that ends the way we think it will, then by the time that kickoff begins, Barcelona are already out of the Champions League into the Europa League. So it doesn't matter. And so Barcelona are
Yep.
really going out and fighting for pride. And you could argue that every La Liga match, of course, going forward is going to be important. Every Europa League match is going to be important. But there is a firm argument that, Barcelona, they did not pass the test in October because of the El Clasico result, because of the Inter Milan results. But going against Bayern Munich, you kind of run that one out. You give your best 11 and you go out and you try to get some kind of result against Bayern Munich. And you use that to galvanize yourself in the Liga and the Europa League, because until after the World Cup, I mean, that's the one. So you put your best 11 out there and then you kind of play it out. And that's how this season goes. So it's one of those that Rafinha was on the bench for 3 straight games. He'll get his chances in the Liga. Xavi's going to get to rotate because this team is good enough to win the Liga. Certainly. We even saw Pablo Torre pop on for the last 15 minutes or so.
Yep.
I guess I want you to answer that, but can we take a little aside real quick about Kessie? Because Kessie comes on yesterday, and I thought both he and Boosie were the only two that I didn't really have compliments for. I think those two were
No.
kind of not up to what the rest of the team was putting out there yesterday. And for Kessie, he was really good in the preseason, and I was really excited about him. The AC Milan guys,
He got more minutes. He got more
yeah.
minutes.
You think it's that simple, that he just needs more form?
Yeah. Yes. He's a rhythm player. He really is. I mean, the more I watch him, the more I think of Paulinho, right? When
Mm-hmm.
you watch his game, you watch the way he moves the ball, you watch the way he, plays wall passes, then moves toward the box. He really is a rhythm
Well,
player.
Paulinho
And
was
when
I will say
you,
Paulinho, though. Paulinho was a much better finisher than he is. Kessier's huge issue his whole career has been finishing. But
yes,
Kessie, on his game, when he works well with his teammates, does move the ball quicker than Paulinho does. So that's the contradiction.
yes. And he is a better
Sure.
defender.
Yeah, I agree with that.
He can finish. He looked like a player out of rhythm his last 2 appearances, and he is a player out of rhythm,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he's just after a preseason where he looked really good and looked like someone who would be in the competition for a relatively regular midfield slot. But I mean, we also thought at the time that Xavi would have the courage to readjust his system and begin to phase out Grandpa Busquets. Right? But that didn't happen. And when that didn't happen, then your midfield is Busquets, Gavi, Pedri, then De Jong is in there. And so, Kessie is the guy who comes off the bench if, somebody gets injured or if it's late enough in a match where, I won't throw him out there. So he's just, right now he has no rhythm and he looks like it. And I think, and it's different from the problems we see with Busquets, where he just is not up to it anymore. And I know that people will say he's brilliant on the ball, blah blah, etc. He isn't anymore. He's too slow, and he slows the entire team down. And the through balls that he was making 2 3 years ago are now being picked off by defenders. And he had another horrific turnover yesterday that the club was lucky to be able to clean up behind. I mean, he's just the more he plays for me, the more of a liability he becomes. And so the question is, does Xavi realize this and begin to get Kessie more minutes with De Jong and Pedri in that four mid setup with the young Pedri and Gavi, done well, but he looked totally out of rhythm yesterday, and it was not pleasant to watch.
Well, I think I think Busquets is kind of the biggest question going against Bayern Munich. I think you'd expect to see a similar lineup that Xavi put against Villarreal because Bayern Munich is, as we've seen before this season, an enhanced version of Villarreal. It's the same, basically the
Yes.
same system, except Bayern Munich do it in the Bayern Munich
Yeah,
way. And I would also say too,
slightly better players.
right. And so Villarreal though they've been good this year. They're fun to watch. I'm not disparaging Villarreal. It's just the difference between Villarreal and Bayern Munich. And it's interesting too because Villarreal is a team that knocked Bayern Munich out last year. So what are
Yeah.
we talking about, right? But when it comes to this game against Bayern Munich, again, I it's hard to be positive because it's not in your hands. Victoria Pilsen has not been good in the Champions League, and they have to go out and they have to do something against Inter Milan and get a result in Italy, which again is unlikely. But for Barcelona this season at home, and this is an important thing too, and one of the great positives of the season, that even though they've been punched in the mouth yesterday in a late match where you didn't have not a lot of visiting athletic club support, still 82,000 in the stadium plus. And so Kool-Aids are showing out this season at home. And Barcelona gave up 4 goals. Gerard Piqué gets to take credit for 2 of them. Busquets and Eric Garcia get to take credit for 1 of them. And so and then there was 1 other goal scored. And that was against Victoria Pilsen, who just got like a consolation goal. So they've really given up. I mean, the regular starters have given up all of a half a goal this season at home. And that is counting La Liga, where they have yet to concede. And then you're talking about the Champions League. And so there is
Yeah.
something about home cooking going on. And so even if Barcelona are already in the Europa League, that kind of asks you what the stakes are for that Bayern Munich match. Because that's kind of the final thing here to do. It's pick our lineup and say, how important is this match? What does this matter? And who are the players that are going to go out there? I think what I will say, and I'll kind of answer it myself, there is a demon inside Barcelona in the back of their head about Bayern Munich. They absolutely need to conquer them. I know they lost to Real Madrid this season in El Clasico last week. I know they lost, but that 4-0 last season in the spring was so important to the mentality of this team in the Liga. And I think that 4-0 did help this year galvanize them and say, hey, we can win the league again this year. And getting over Bayern Munich, I mean, that might be the more essential thing to next year's Champions League campaign than how they do in the Europa League. Or, I mean, obviously signings over the summer is going to be the most important thing they could do, and Xavi continuing to build this project. But getting over the hump of Bayern Munich in the Champions League might be the most essential thing they do this season in the Champions League for next season.
So yeah, I mean, so Bayern is like, and I don't mean to go back in time, but when the Chicago Bulls couldn't beat the Detroit Pistons, right? Year after year in the playoffs, and when they finally did, right, that made that team really take shape. I feel, I mean, you could argue that Barcelona could have beaten Bayern in Germany had Pedri not had Pedri made his shots better, had Lewandowski not missed,
Mm-hmm.
for lack of a. I mean, they had chances to notch 3 or 4 goals in that match, and once the physical and mental supremacy of Bayern, and that's what it is, right? I mean, Bayern is a mentally stronger team right now. Barcelona, especially when you have the legacy of failure group on the pitch, they're not a mentally tough team when any adversity happens, right? They just don't know how to manage it. And I think that they have to at least draw Bayern at home. And then they might be out of Champions League, but they'll be able to hop into their free Audis, drive home, and feel better about themselves next day, and that will set the springboard. It really is a shame that the World Cup break is coming up so quickly, right? Because I mean, this team, the last two matches in Liga, once you exclude the Real Madrid match, I mean, they've really been in form, and they looked so good yesterday. So I think that they have to get a result against Bayern, no matter what Inter does. They have to get a result against Bayern because I feel like psychologically, Bayern is their Detroit Pistons. They need to find a way to beat that team because right now Bayern is not. I don't think they're that much better talent wise, but mentally and physically, there's a gulf. Same with Real Madrid. I mean, mentally, Real is so much. It never occurs to Madrid that they're going to lose. Never.
Yeah.
Barca gives up a goal, and it's like, oh boy, here we go. Right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's a mentally fragile team, and that result, any result against Bayern, might start to shift some of that, and as you said, lead to and then post World Cup, knock wood, they've got a full squad back. They've got a fit out of who they've got Kunde. They've got everyone they need to make a real run at not only the Liga but possibly Europa League. Because I mean, this team has to win some silver this
Yes.
year. The gambles that the club took in the off season, as we saw laid out in a really good Twitter breakdown by Swiss Ramble, the club took some real chances in the off season with the money. And if they go trophyless this year, that's gonna be brutal. So this, Copa Europa, it has to win something, and I think that the Bayern result will dictate how the rest of this season goes for them, and whether they have a shot at winning anything. And if they don't, Xavi won't be fired, but next season the ice will be getting pretty thin under his
Well,
boots.
yeah, because that would technically be season number 3 or 2.5, and we know that season 3 is when the referendum comes, even for these club legends. Um, but yeah, I agree about the fact that mentally for Bayern Munich, I mean, as much as Real Madrid, I don't know why I did this to myself a few weeks ago, but I watched Real Madrid against Adafe. It was the one where I think it was Eder Militao scored in like the third minute on a header. And then Real Madrid were like, this match we're done with this. And they kind of, it was awful. I mean, the rest of that match was awful to watch. And yet Real Madrid knew exactly what they needed to do. And they did it, and they do it ugly, and they do it in that awful Real Madrid way. And believe it or not, Bayern Munich, I have been able to catch enough of them in the Bundesliga this year. It's very much the same thing. Like there are teams
Yeah,
that would surprise you who have gone out and punched Bayern in the mouth, and Bayern at times have not really had an answer in the Bundesliga for other teams that they should be beating on paper, but they've they get results because they're Bayern Munich, and there comes a moment when occasionally they flip that switch, but very much like Real Madrid, there sometimes the switch doesn't flip, and they're fine with it, and they go, okay, well we're just going to win the next one because that's who we are. We're the winners. We do what we
yeah,
do, and there's that mentality thing that changes. And the only thing that I can say, I didn't get to do any scouting or anything while I was walking around Munich, but I will say that it was rainy and it has been rather dreary the last few days there. And so I'm hoping that everyone's just coming in and moping in and in bad moods. But I can say that not having Manuel Neuer is important. So last piece of business, though, Kevin, is the 11 for Barcelona against Bayern Munich. I think for me, it's pretty, set in stone. Unless Christensen, there are some rumors that he may be back for Wednesday. I don't think so. I think we're going to see
I don't
Eric
think so.
and Kunde. And now that Roberto's out, I think you're actually calling on Bayern pretty quickly. The other argument would be, would you have? Well, exactly. It's a real choice there. Would you rather have Piqué step back in with Eric,
No,
and
no, no.
rather Kunde as right back, or would you rather have Bayern, and that means you're left with Kunde, Eric, Balde, of course. You and I agree on that. I think Gabi, now that he's questionable, I think that really brings everything under fire. I think Pedri and De Jong are definitely your starters, and I can't, regardless of whether what you and I would want, I don't think we could possibly see Kessie get the start over Busquets. I think if Gabi can't go,
No.
it's going to be Busi, De Jong, and Pedri. And then up top, as I've said, I think you have to go onto Lewandowski, Dembele because of form and the way that this team is currently playing with that setup. I think that has to be the front three. So I don't know. Do you have any arguments or disagreements? It seems like logically that's kind of the 11 that I put myself in.
I mean, I think just because of circumstance, it has to be how it is. I think. I mean, yes, I would love to see Xavi run out, Kessie and instead of Busquets. I think the team would be better for it. I think they'd be better for an attack, a defense, and ball circulation. But we both know that's never going to happen.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that midfield is going to be a problem because none of them are fleet of foot. None of them are very physical. I don't think that while I love the runs uh, De Jong makes, he doesn't have the physical capabilities to get back into where he needs to be after those runs. And so suddenly you have Pedri caught up. You've got De Jong trying to run back, and there's Busquets just sort of waiting for any kind of contact, hoping he can fall over and get a foul call to stop the attack.
But you're
It's
talking
not
about
an optimal.
just for clarification, you're talking about De Jong as an interior in front of De Jong. I mean, in front of Busquets, and not about
Yes,
De Jong as the pivot against Villarreal. Because I mean, that's what made him the man of the match against Villarreal. Was his positional discipline was excellent. I mean, that was the best positional discipline and positional awareness that we have ever seen from Frankie De Jong in a Barcelona uniform in that match against Villarreal.
yes. And so my midfield would be De Jong in the hole with Pedri and Kessie. Right, that'd be my midfield. Xavi won't do that, but that is what I would do. And then the other thing and my only argument for moving Dembele to the left might be the interplay potential between he and Balde. I think that those two have the potential to make things happen. Fati, I mean, he's not looked all that good his last outings, but as you know, he's sort of the least bad of Xavi's options because you have if you play with Rafinha, you have to play him on the right. You have to because he can't play on the left. And Ferran Torres doesn't defend well enough. I know people talk about runs and how he uses space, blah blah blah, etc. Now in the wing, he doesn't.
Yeah.
He's just a cipher out there. He can't be anybody off the dribble. Loses every physical challenge, so you can't use him. So I mean, it has to be Fati process process of, and so I don't know if that team is good enough to beat Bayern. It might be good enough to draw Bayern, and even a draw would be huge.
Mm-hmm.
Or like a 2-2 or 3-3 would be huge for them. So we'll see. I mean, but now does he use Alonso as a center back?
I mean, if you're asking me, I'd rather have Eric Garcia Kunde or Alonso. I mean, I don't think that's a conversation that I'm willing to have, Kevin. I
Yeah.
there's no way I want to.
He's done it before,
Yeah, but
though.
there's no way. I think I would like to see Marcos Alonso, and then as the left center back, and then Eric as the right, and then I mean, yeah. Now you're asking Alonso or Bayern. And what we saw from Sergio Roberto working with Dembele, and I think that's what Xavi should do for Bayern and say, hey, I know you're not Sergio Roberto. I mean, Bayern's ability to come inside is not what Sergio Roberto's is.
No.
Positionally, Roberto has a lot more positional sense in that way. But I would say that if you're Xavi, you're going to say to Bayern, hey, I want you to do your best Sergio Roberto impression, believe it or not, of what you just saw him do against Athletic Club. And let's try to see that at the back. But I think I agree with you. I'm a bit worried that Xavi is going to start. I'm a bit worried that he's going to start um, that he will start Marcos Alonso in some way. And
Yeah.
if and obviously he shouldn't be at left back, so he'll be at the left center back position. But that said, we have heard reports. Like I know that we've not got an update yet, but we have heard reports. Yesterday, we heard that Gabi is likely going to be available, and if he's available, Gabi's going to start. If I mean
Yes.
100%. So I think we may be able to talk our way out of that pretty quickly. And again, Christensen has not been ruled out. He's not been ruled in, but Christensen has not been ruled out. And so I think if Christensen is good to go, we've seen from Xavi so far that Barcelona seem to have. I mean, I think Ricard Pruna being back is really important, but Xavi has trusted his doctors, and it has worked to good effect. Barcelona players are
Yes.
not getting hurt this year, other than, I mean, obviously, Sergio Roberto dislocated shoulder is a lot different from Xavi overworking him, right? That's a dislocated shoulder. Gabi got hurt against Athletic Club. That was a tackle. That was not something that you prepare for or something that's about recovery and rest. But anything that has to do with diet, recovery, training sessions, intensity, Barcelona have been healthy this season. So if his doctors, and that being Pruna, says Christensen is good to go, you can start him. Gabi is good to go, you can start him. Then Xavi is going to start those players. And so
Yes.
I think the scenario that you and I creating is the worst version of the 11 that Xavi might have available, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've written before, I've said before. I think that PK, I think the captains, right? It, when next season comes along, if any of those captains are still with the club, then something's gone horribly wrong. I think what they represent psychologically, even sitting on the bench, it's just they there's a legacy of failure present in those people that I believe feels contagious. And I think, I mean, never mind the limitations that Busquets already has. I just think he's representative of something you don't need when your team undergoes hardship, right? And there will be hardship against Bayern. You can count on it. I just, I mean, I worry about that match. I feel like if they concede first, it could get grim. I would love to be wrong. And I think that the biggest problem for me is that, you know, when Busquets starts, Barca's too easy to defend. They just
Mhm.
are. And so, hence my argument for, Kessie De Jong, Pedri, or, maybe even a four man, where you add Gavi.
Mhm.
But I mean, I think that Xavi has to find a way to move the ball more rapidly against elite teams.
Yep.
He
100%.
does. And I think, I mean, right now in La Liga, there are two elite teams, or one and a half. I think Real, they're elite. I think that Barcelona has possibility of being elite, but they're not there yet, and that's it, right? So that's why they can have the success in league that they're having, because they're sort of the second quasi elite team. If Real gets a couple of stumbles or has a rough Champions League run, you could see maybe Barcelona nipping them at the line for the league. You could see them maybe doing well in Copa del Rey. I don't think if that squad goes to Europa League, I don't think that squad is good enough to win Europa League unless something magical happens in the midfield, right? Because it's no matter what midfield permutation you have, it's too slow. And so any reasonable counter will break that midfield apart. And then you've got 3 or 4 attackers running at back line that's going, holy crap,
Yeah,
now
I mean,
what?
the only thing about Europa, I will say, is that I know that we talk about the big giants are all there. Atleti is there, and Juve is there. But it's like Marvel Comics. Like each of the big teams that are in the Europa League this year all have some kind of Marvel flaw. Like each of them
Oh, yeah.
has some kind of major issue where on their podcasts they're all saying, "How is this team that's in the Europa League, this big team? How would they doesn't have a squad that's good enough to win it? Like why not? And two, there's a reason that team is there, and that flaw is why we, you know what I mean, with quotes around that, we aren't going to win the Europa League this year. But anyway, Kevin, I will say that I'm hoping I don't have to use it, but I am letting you know that you're a journalist, and I am going to steal legacy of failure if Barcelona fail to get a result against Bayern Munich.
It's all
If they get
yours.
blown off the field, I can tell you that the second podcast of this week will probably be titled Legacy of Failure, and I'm hoping that I don't have to use it. But today, obviously, you've already seen it. It's Dembele's best. So it was all positive today, more positive than you and I usually get to do, Kevin. But I would appreciate you coming on the show as always. So remember, you can follow him down in the show notes below. He's got more and more time now that he's in Portugal, just hanging out and getting to tweet and think about Barcelona. So Kevin, as always, thanks for your time.
Pleasure.
And thank you so much for listening to the show. Again, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook group, Patreon, merch store, YouTube. You know where to find us. So thanks so much for listening to the Barcelona podcast. Till next time, we'll talk to you soon. Forza Barça.